Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Delaware made history in this week's Democratic primary. Offshore wind plans along the Ocean City coastline get another approval as a resort plans legal action. And we'll talk with Salisbury Poet Laureate Nancy Mitchell on the From Here, Come Here discussion planned for the Maryland Folk Festival. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. So for the latest on this week's elections, particularly in Delaware, along with other stories in our studio this afternoon is Susan Canfora, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don.
So first of all, Susan, we had really two history-making nominations in the Democratic primary, perhaps most notable being State Senator Sarah McBride, who would become the first transgender member of Congress, if she wins the general election. Also, Lisa Blunt Rochester, perhaps becoming the first African-American woman from Delaware to be a senator from the state. What's going on here? What were the results?
We found out that in the race for U.S. Representative in Congress, Senator Sarah McBride easily defeated challengers Earl Cooper and Elias Weir. McBride won in all Delaware counties, receiving 80% of the vote statewide.
I have seen throughout my life, I've seen throughout my career, that nothing is truly impossible. And indeed, when you get past the noise and the far right-wing imposed culture wars, and you actually focus on real tangible issues, there's opportunities there for progress.
Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester ran unopposed in the primary. The Democrat will face Republican Eric Hansen in the general election in November, as well as independent Mike Katz. In the Democratic race for governor, Matt Meyer defeated current Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long, winning 47% of the vote and coming in first in all three Delaware counties, that's Sussex, Kent, and Newcastle. In the general election, Meyer will face Republican Mike Ramone. Kyle Evans-Gay won the Democratic race for lieutenant governor. The Republican candidate for lieutenant governor is Ruth Briggs King. In the Democratic race for state House representing District 14, that's the seat Democrat Pete Schwarzkopf held for more than 20 years before retiring. Democrat Claire Snyder Hall won, defeating challenger Kathy McGinnis. You might remember 2 years ago, McGinnis, who was Delaware's state auditor, was found guilty of several corruption charges. Snyder Hall got 41% of the vote, defeating both challengers, McGinnis and Marty Rendon. McGinnis received the least number of votes. In the November 5th general election, Snyder Hall will face Republican Mike Simpler. I talked to Snyder Hall after the primary, and she said she was elated and looking forward to going to Dover as one of the lawmakers. One of her top priorities is passing vote by mail. That would allow anyone to vote safely from home without having to provide an excuse to the government. And there was victory for Delaware Governor John Carney. He will soon be out of office as governor after 8 years, and this week he was elected mayor of Wilmington. There is no Republican challenger in months to come. We will see the governor running the town of Wilmington. Locally in the Sussex County Council race, Mike Vincent, he's the longtime Republican president of the Sussex County Council. He was unseated in Tuesday's primary. The winner for that District 1 seat was newcomer Matthew Lloyd, a loyal resident and U.S. Air Force veteran. Vincent, who was 79 and who was running for his fifth four-year term, got about 1,300 votes to Lloyd's 2,000 votes. There was an upset in District 2 as well. Incumbent Republican County Councilwoman Cynthia Green was seeking a second term on the Sussex County Council, but newcomer Steve McCarron unseated her by about 700 more votes than she received. McCarron is 47, a businessman, and the father of two, and there are no Democratic challengers for either of those two Sussex County Council seats.
And I also understand that we certainly have the departure of the current mayor of Bethany Beach, Rosemary Hardiman. You had a long chat with her. What did she have to say about her time in office?
I did. She was very supportive of the new council members who were elected on next Monday, on September 16th. 4 Bethany Beach Town Council members will be sworn in to serve for the next 2 years. Incumbents Ron Califf, Mickey Hinman, and Rich McHugh were re-elected, as well as newcomer Bob Rush, who was elected for the first time. A fifth candidate, Russell Evans, finished last with about 130 votes. At that reorganizational meeting on September 16th, a new mayor will be elected. An outgoing mayor, Rosemary Hardiman, who did not seek re-election, was very supportive of the newly elected councilmen and told me Bethany Beach is in good hands. I talked to Ron Califf and Mickey Hinman. the two top vote getters in the September 7th election. They both told me they are really looking forward to the next 2 years. And then right before the election, outgoing Mayor Hardeman and I had a nice conversation. In her lighthearted, often self-deprecating way, she told me the many accolades she received from fellow council members and town staff were the result of her paying them to say those things. And that's her personality, quick to deflect attention away from herself and even faster to point out how well her colleagues are doing. She's very proud of the council, she said, for being thoughtful and polite toward each other and residents, even during heated discussions. The council, she said, is a place of civility in an uncivil world. And here's a little bit else of what we talked about.
I think a lot of the things that have been accomplished are just moving things along, like the dam, if it's implemented, and we hope it will. And I give a lot of credit to that, goes back years to Harry Steele, who first proposed it in the late 1990s, and it would have died a long time ago if it wasn't for the persistence of Cliff Gravier. And he kept after it, got the Army Corps of Engineers to study it, and got all kinds of studies done. So we're at a point now where the legislators are all on board with it, and Ocean View is. We've been able to satisfy our neighbors that the dam would not have the effect of causing flooding in Ocean View. And now we're just in the permitting process, which can be the most difficult, I think another thing that we've done that has moved along very well is pedestrian and bicycle safety. The one I would really love to see happen sooner rather than later is South Pennsylvania. To me, that is one of the most challenging. But the problem with South Pennsylvania is the canopy of trees. You don't want to remove the canopy of trees, so you have to find a way. North Atlantic has issues too. If you look at North Atlantic from 2nd to 5th, a lot of those homes were built before we had zoning regulations in effect, so they're closer to the street. And we don't want to impede anything. You want to respect the neighborhood if you can, and things like that. And then, preserving the land spit and doing dredging, which is hopefully will start soon in the Loop Canal. Back in 2016, we bought 7 acres of land out at Blackwater, out of the floodplain. And in Frankfurt, there's an emergency here. We get flooded out. We have offices already set up out there. Wow, so it has a place for the police department, staff, everybody out there. In case of a hurricane where you have to close this down for any reason, government can continue. We reorganized the police department, as you know.
Yes.
And when people were saying go outside and get someone, we've known all these officers since they were seasonal officers.
Yeah, that's true.
So we've raised them. And the morale right now is sky.
What do you think is the hardest part about being mayor? Major things happened in the past year.
Well, I hate to say no.
I know.
But I learned early on from a wonderful man named Don Doyle, who had been on council. He was then out of the treasurer at St. Anne's. When I first came on council in 2014, I would talk to him because I always had this thing, you try to please everybody. Yeah. And he would sit down with me. I'd go to him and say, Don, he said, listen, he said, you have to be prepared. You have to study every issue. You have to know the things. And then you make the best decision for the good of the town. And somebody's always going to be unhappy.
Yeah.
So,
that's true.
And I think people think, that's one thing I discovered, people think that if they come to a meeting and they're opposed to something, that you're not going to do it. And it's not a referendum.
Right.
It's
just a discussion.
What you have to do is you have to be aware of all the facts and be able to address them. And if people come, if they can present a good reason why something should be changed or something that makes sense, then you can do it. But if it's just we don't want it, that's not a reason.
You hear a lot of we don't want it.
We don't want it. That's not a reason. When people write to me and they say, what about this or what about that? I really feel education is a big part of it.
Yeah.
So you don't just say yes or no or this is it. As a matter of fact, if you've ever received an email from me in response to a simple question, it's probably 3 pages long. Because then if people ask a question, if you educate them as to the history and the reasons behind it and everything, then they're educated and they understand something better than if you just said yes or no. Yep. And COVID, that was a tough time for all of us. And I was mayor during that time, and I remember things changed daily. You have to worry about the businesses, and because then you're caught between a rock and a hard place. You have the governor saying you can open the beaches, but you have to enforce social distancing. So then we tried to cut down on the number of people in the beachfront lots, and that didn't help the businesses. But I really liked those COVID calls because you got to learn about different municipalities.
I learned a lot. So what's happening now? What are you going to do after the 16th?
Well, just I think take a rest for a little bit. Have family, friends that I haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, you've been so busy.
Yeah, sure. And then I'm going to do some stuff here too. And I still do volunteer with the library, with the cottage tour, and I do at the church, and
I thought so.
But we're just turning it over to the next generation. And I've made a point to go out and identify good people. And I'm very proud of that, because for example, there were 2 people who ran last year, and a lot of people in town will not vote for someone if they haven't been on a committee or something, because it shows they're dedicated. So last year, after the election, there were a couple of people who had not been on a committee. So Jerry Morris approached them and said, would you like to be on a committee?
Good.
And so one of them said yes, and is on budget and finance and is doing a great job. And the other said he didn't have time. So you wonder, how are you going to have time for council if you don't have time? You know what I mean?
Right. Do you have any idea who's going to be the next mayor? Do you know, or do they decide that?
I suspect who.
You suspect it'll be? I'm guessing Ron Califf, because he's the vice mayor.
He's the vice mayor.
That's my guess.
And that was one of the reasons why, I asked him to be vice mayor. Ron is into everything. He's the farmer's market. He sees the day. He does everything.
Yeah. And that's Bethany Beach outgoing mayor, Rosemary Hardiman.
So, Susan, we also have a redrawing of the voting districts in Millsboro. What's going on with that?
This came after considerable discussion. The Millsboro Town Council has now approved a resolution to establish newly drawn election districts. They will present the recommendation to Delaware Senator Gerald Hucker and Representatives Ron Gray and Rich Collins, and ask those lawmakers to take the request to the General Assembly and approve the town's request to change its charter to establish the new districts. The 2025 legislative session starts in January. At the meeting last week, Councilman Marty Presley, he's a member of Millsboro's redistricting committee appointed by Mayor Kimberly Kahn, told fellow council members that the proposed boundaries are, for District 1, the area north of Route 113 and east of Main Street to the town limits; for District 2, the area north of Route 113 and west of Main Street to town limits; and for District 3, south of Route 113 to town limits. Each district will be formed of contiguous territory and, as much as possible, be nearly equal in population. And that will be based on the most recent census information.
So what does this spark for all of this? Because I understand Plantation Lane, that's where a lot of the people are.
That's exactly what started it. Plantation Lakes is a huge, growing residential community. They're still building there. There's still new houses going up there. There's a lot of people buying houses and moving in. And what happened was it made the population of Millsboro uneven, with a lot of it to the west instead of to the east. So they're trying to change the lines for the voting districts to make that more equal.
So this past weekend we had the Nanticoke Indian Powwow, and of course you were there.
One of my favorite places to be in September. It was a beautiful day for the 46th annual Nanticoke Indian Powwow in Milton, Delaware last weekend. Hundreds of guests were there Saturday and Sunday, enjoying that Indian fry bread with butter and powdered sugar, and Indian tacos made with ground beef and cheese layered on the fry bread. The guests shopped for Indian blankets and bracelets and toys and dream catchers and dried sage to burn for blessings. And again, I got blessed by one of the elders with that sage. So if anybody needed a blessing, it was me, and I got it. Keith Colston was the MC, and he is there every year. This year he had a very special request of the guests who gathered around the dance circle to watch the grand entry of dancers dressed in traditional regalia. Colston asked them not to search for dissimilarities among those attending, but to look at the common cultural characteristics we share of the earth and especially the heart. Nanticoke Raggy Rain spoke in both the native Nanticoke language and English as she prayed to the one who creates through thought all things into existence. May there be good medicine here today for all of us. Let us walk this way. Let it be done, she prayed. Colston asked everyone to stand and remove their hats as flags, including the U.S. flag, were presented, and he invited veterans into the circle to be honored. Nanticoke Chief Avery Johnson was there. He greeted the crowd, and he thanked special guest Senator Tom Carper, who always goes to these powwows, for making our request successful. Carper said $750,000 has been allocated from the state government to improve both the Education Center and the Indian Museum in Millsboro. And if you haven't toured that little museum, you really should. It's just full of artifacts that really explain the history and the ways of the Nanticoke people.
So you've been to these things before. What is it like to walk around?
I've been to 6 of them, I think, ever since I started working for Coastal Point. It's just a lovely day. It's usually a sunny day. There are vendors set up everywhere, a lot of food and vendors selling crafts and explaining the history and the spiritual connection between Earth and individuals. A lot of dancers, even little tiny children, little toddlers dressed in the Indian regalia, dancing, learning the steps, and everybody's invited to come into the circle and be part of the dances. And it's just a day when the cultures blend and people really seem to love each other for a few hours anyhow, and everybody seems to have a really good time. It's one of my favorite things to cover every year.
So did you dance?
No, I didn't dance. I was too
You
busy
didn't
taking
dance?
pictures and getting sound for us.
Oh,
I didn't dance. I did tap my toe a little. That's about as much dancing as I do.
So the Nanticoke, just briefly, I mean, Nanticoke in Native Americans, they've had a long history here on the shores.
They've had a very long history here, and they're very proud people. They recently, I think it was last spring, released a book explaining the Nanticoke language and the words, how to pronounce them. There are a lot of double and triple vowels, which makes some of the words very hard to pronounce. I've tried. Chief Avery Johnson has been so nice. He's tried to teach me some of the words. And when he sends me text messages, he puts a few Nanticoke words in there just to remind me. So they've been very nice. They've kind of adopted me as a kind of like a resident Nanticoke, and I'm very fond of them. I really am. Very nice people.
What's the language like? I mean, what does it sound like?
It's a very unusual sound. I don't know that I can compare it to any other language, but it's if you know how to speak it, it's a beautiful language. It's just learning it and learning the vowels and the syllables. You have to start from the very beginning and learn it from somebody who knows what he or she is doing. Like Raggy Rain, she speaks it just beautifully. And she's one of the co-authors of that book. That book is for sale at the museum.
So finally, we have a motorcycle bike week, as it were, bike week in Ocean City. Should be crowded, should be noisy.
Don, I've had bikers tell me that you can hear them coming before you see them. And as someone who lives just a few miles away from Ocean City, I can attest to that because I've been hearing them for days now. There are about 150,000 bikers who've been arriving to enjoy Bike Fest 2024 in Ocean City and the surrounding areas. They'll be going to concerts by some pretty popular performers this time. Styx, Cheap Trick, Ted Nugent, the largest motorcycle rally on the East Coast, which started on Wednesday and continues through Sunday, will also include vendors selling motorcycle merchandise, events at the Ocean City Convention Center, and a bike bash in nearby Millsboro, Delaware, at the American Legion, where bikers can raise money for local veterans. There are signs all around Ocean City welcoming the bikers who have been coming to Ocean City every September for years. And of course, they bring a great deal of revenue to Ocean City, and they have a lot of fun. So we all welcome the bikers, and we'll see them around Salisbury too, Don.
Have there been any recent incidents with the bikers, or has it been quiet? Or?
It has been quiet so far. Most of them come in Thursday night or Friday night, and as far as I know, I haven't seen anything. Most of them are very polite, and most of them are, they're nice on the road. They'll move over for you. There's always a few that have a little too much to drink, but overall, it's really a nice event.
In the past, have they had problems at all, or
they have had problems in Ocean City in the past with speeding and disobeying the police, and there was a couple fatal accidents in years by. So there have been. When you get that many people on motorcycles, I guess you can't help but have a few incidents. But overall, it's always a nice event.
And I assume that the police will be out in force,
yes,
of course.
Police will be out in full force, and they'll have help from the sheriff's office and the state police as well.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfora. She's a reporter for Coastal Point. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
As always, it's a pleasure.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.